Today we're going to be talking about the meaning of retrograde planets in your chart and what this means. What retrogrades are when the Earth moves past a certain planet in its orbit, meaning the Earth and this outer planet are on the same side of being like the same side relative to the sun. As the Earth moves past this planet, which is an outer planet, it appears to us as though the planet starts to move backwards in the sky. Now, Mercury is closer to the sun than Earth, so retrogrades happen more often with Mercury, also because it tends to have a faster orbit. And in terms of Mercury retrograde, I feel like it's a little bit different than with Mars and any planet that's outside of the Earth in terms of the solar system. But I forgot exactly how that works. But essentially, the planets look like they're moving backwards, but it's just an optical illusion. And essentially, Earth is passing the planet in orbit. And so what retrograde planets represent is something being held back relative to the rest of the collective. So in general, when you have a retrograde planet, this indicates traits that you hold back or that hold you back relative to the collective. So these can be late bloomer traits. And these could be inactive planets, unexpressed planets. It's also about reflection when it comes to retrogrades. Because when a planet is retrograde, that is when it is closest to Earth. At least for the planets that are Mars and beyond. Again, I'm not sure exactly the case with Mercury retrograde, which is actually an inner planet compared to Earth. But for the most part, I know that with Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and so on, when they are retrograde, that is when they are closest to the Earth. So that's when we are seeing them, most clearly, with the exception of any of the planets beyond Saturn, which technically we can't see with the naked eye. But with that being said, anyway, the planets are closer to Earth in their orbit, and so we're taking a closer look at the themes of this planet during the time of a retrograde. And a lot of times retrogrades are having to do with unfinished karma regarding the planet, and it can be harder to get results regarding that planet. So we're going to talk about what retrogrades mean through each of the different planets that you can have retrograde in your chart at birth. So check the timestamps in the description. If you're enjoying this video so far, then in the next 3 seconds, go ahead and leave a like on this video. 3, 2, all right. I appreciate it. And go ahead and also subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more content. Now let's get back, into the other meanings of retrogrades. Is that a lot of times retrogrades can be misunderstood by others because the planet is moving in a different direction at birth. So this is showing an unconventional approach to things regarding the themes of that planet. So if it was Venus, this could be about love. If this was Mercury, this could be about communication. Mercury retrograde can often show speech impediments or something hindering one's communication, or even how they learned how to communicate. There could be some delay. Generally speaking, planets that are retrograde can be misunderstood by others or cause us to feel more isolated or alone because it feels like the collective is progressing in comparison to us regarding that planet, because that planet at our time of birth was being held back in the sky, metaphorically speaking. So to summarize a retrograde planet, it has almost the effect of a debilitated planet. Not so much in terms of the sign meaning of a debilitation, but in terms of that planet being harder to get results with, and in terms of this planet having to do with traits that hold you back, or that you hold back, or that you don't express. It's kind of like a rogue planet as well, where there's an element of nonconformity and where we are not like the rest of society. Maybe even we're not educated in the themes of that planet, so we had to learn it for ourselves. And it could just show a difficulty learning or adapting when it comes to the themes of that planet. And yeah, so with that being said, it's ultimately all about trials and tribulations and learning from our own experience when it comes to retrograde planets, because it could be things that we were not taught in our upbringing. I'm interrupting this video with a brief mid-roll promotion. I wanted to talk to you guys about readings. I'm currently doing natal chart readings and interpretations. So if you would like a personalized video reading that is private and only sent to you, covering your personality, your talents, as well as your financial astrology, and then your destiny or your soul's purpose, which would be based on the North Node placement and the rulers of that, then check the email in my description, which is readings@astroseri.com, and go ahead and send me an email if you would be interested in booking a reading. Let me know which type of reading that you're interested in, and we will work things out from there. With that being said, let's get back into the topic of this video. Thank you. Let's go ahead and start with the meaning of Mercury retrograde. Mercury is the planet of thought and communication. It's also about movement and short distance travel, so it can be about things such as driving. Generally speaking, people with Mercury retrograde had some delays or challenges when it comes to the themes of interaction, communication, and thinking. They could have been slower learners early on, and also they could be people that are less active, or they like to stay more in place because Mercury likes to do a bunch of errands and go on short trips. So unless you're ruled by Mercury, meaning you have the ascendant in Gemini or in Virgo, if you have Mercury retrograde, you may have a tendency to prefer staying at home or staying in place more. Now, when it comes to social endeavors and interactions, these things can feel laborious when you have Mercury retrograde, and words or tongue feels less sharp or impactful. And when it comes to communication and to thought, you have a slow and steady way of approaching those things and presenting a point. Also coming to conclusions. The next thing about Mercury retrograde that I noticed is that it can show a tendency for disorder, like being more disorganized. And that's because Mercury is one of the planets, the signs that it rules is Virgo, which is about organization. So retrogrades show difficulty expressing something or harder to get results. So it's harder for these individuals to organize their thoughts sometimes, or organize their possessions even. So they can be a little bit more disorganized. Next, we have Venus retrograde. So Venus is the planet of love, relatability, and value. And it's also about harmony and balance, equilibrium, and reciprocity. Generally speaking, if you have Venus retrograde, you are impatient, especially in matters of love, relating, or value. Oftentimes, having Venus retrograde, since Venus is an air planet, it rules Libra, it can show a difficulty with the concept of equilibrium or of balance, especially in an interpersonal sense. So these individuals may have difficulty maintaining or attracting the people or the things that they value. But I would say especially like maintaining those things, because they may have a maladaptive approach to relationships regarding anxious attachment style, and oftentimes feeling like they have to do a lot in order to have love, because Venus is about attracting. So when Venus is retrograde, sometimes it shows a difficulty with patience and also a difficulty with letting things come to you. Also, Venus is about receiving, so there can be difficulty receiving or not understanding the concept of like receiving and of reciprocity. A lot of times Venus retrograde can show trials and tribulations when it comes to relationships, and there can be a sense of self-delusion or confusion around one's own sense of value. It can almost feel like that those things are vague or like not clear. Oftentimes they may sabotage or self-sabotage connections by having a bad sense of equilibrium and reciprocity. They might have a tendency to overdo things in relationships and feel like they have to do everything, and they might be very picky or controlling in relationships in some cases when Venus is retrograde. Other times they are not so much controlling but maybe impulsive in love or something like that. With that being said, they may also call out too strongly for love and attention through their actions. And unlike Venus, this is not a subtle or graceful way of receiving attention and love. And this may have come just from the fact of not being educated about their value growing up, not learning their sense of self-worth, and also maybe not having a healthy relating style to their parents or to the people in their upbringing, never learning how to relate in a balanced and reciprocal manner, and maybe feeling like they're always responsible in their upbringing, like maybe having been felt like they have to do a lot for love or something. In general, with Venus retrograde, it can feel like in love you fear being left behind or something like this, because again, retrograde planets are when a planet gets held back in the sky, and Venus represents love. And retrogrades can be an isolating feeling because it is something that about us that is not like the rest of society, or like it feels like Earth is moving forward where we are held back. So with love, like the planet of love, this can be an isolating feeling, or like a fear of being left behind in love. And a lot of times the universe will cause you to experience moments of solitude where you can self-reflect and develop your sense of self-worth and realize your value when you have Venus retrograde, because retrograde planets can be about self-reflection as well, and it can be unfinished karma regarding that planet. So there's lessons around learning self-worth. Now, due to Venus being about balance, there is a tendency to throw things out of equilibrium and cause collapsive moments when somebody has Venus retrograde, especially in interpersonal situations. And often they may disregard their own value and overlook concepts such as reciprocity, consequence. They may give others love that those people don't necessarily deserve. And in the end, this is creating an energetic imbalance that creates destructive moments in their own life, where they turn around and they don't have the support that they need one day, or when things are just out of equilibrium. So anyway, that is Venus being retrograde. It can just generally show a difficulty around the concept of reciprocity, relating, and equilibrium. Ultimately, though, these people are very service oriented, and they can be big givers when it comes to love. Like they give a lot to others. They feel like love is like relationships are based on what they do. Next, this takes us to Mars retrograde. Mars is the planet of action, is the planet of impulse, can be about desire as well and how we pursue things. Generally speaking, it's about agency and how we accomplish things. So having Mars retrograde can show a difficulty with productivity, taking action, and getting where somebody wants to be in life, or getting things accomplished. Those that have Mars retrograde have a tendency to be indecisive and indirect, and sometimes leave issues unresolved, especially those regarding conflict or confrontation. Mars can also be about anger, and when a planet is retrograde, this is about unexpressed things. So Mars retrograde can show a tendency to not express anger or conflict. And since Mars is about accomplishing things, how you'll notice somebody with Mars retrograde, or something that you'll notice if you have Mars retrograde, is that a lot of times you have a tendency to leave tasks unfinished. It doesn't mean you can't accomplish things, but as with all retrograde planets, things become more laborious or harder to get results due to having a disorganized or unconventional approach to things. Mars is also about impulse, and retrograde is about things that we hold back. So people with Mars retrograde may hold a lot of their impulses back, or a lot of their Martian energy inwards. And so often the men in specific can be single for longer periods, because Mars is having to do with pursuit and like the masculine side of romance and attraction. And it's how we pursue things. So these people that have Mars retrograde may have a tendency to procrastinate, or to not pursue enough in love, or like to delay their pursuit. A lot of times the things that they desire can escape them when they procrastinate. Mars retrograde just shows a tendency to wait for things to come to you. And this can actually strengthen your Venus energy. So it does make you attractive in another sense, because a lot of times people wish you would express the desire that you have within you, or that you would pursue more. So it can have an attractive effect as a consequence that somebody does not pursue a lot. But generally speaking, that can be their main approach, is to just wait for things to come to them. Or that could just be their general expectation, is that if they do something, that things will easily come to them. In some ways, Mars retrograde have a tendency to dilly-dally and bask around a lot, sometimes to procrastinate. But since Mars is about passion, and that energy of passion gets held within, they have a very vivid internal life. So generally speaking, they're quite content, and like they're big daydreamers as well. Like they have big dreams, but sometimes they just don't act on them. Sometimes Mars retrograde people can have bigger dreams or bigger goals than a normal Mars person, but they may just be content daydreaming on it. And if only they acted on their dreams, they actually can achieve huge success. But again, they have a harder time with productivity, getting things accomplished than normal, because there's an unconventional approach when it comes to Mars. Finally, Mars is about sexual energy. So Mars retrograde can show unexpressed sexual energy. or sexuality, unexpressed desire at times, and this tendency to procrastinate on pursuing things. Next, we're going to talk about Jupiter retrograde. Having Jupiter retrograde can indicate having a more pessimistic or fearful outlook on life rather than an optimistic one, because Jupiter is about optimism, inspiration, faith, and sense of direction. Generally speaking, when you have Jupiter retrograde, you'll have this sense of being unsure about your future or confused or indecisive around your sense of direction more than most, because you're somebody that has a tendency to want to know things for certain, or you have this tendency that whenever you get a realization, for you, it is not an epiphany, but rather it just raises more questions. Jupiter retrograde people, instead of having realizations and epiphanies, they just get more questions, because Jupiter can be about truth and answers and knowledge. And when it's retrograde, it becomes more introspective, so it's more about asking more questions. So this can make them be indecisive about their sense of direction and about beliefs or what can be right from wrong, at least when it comes to themselves and what they want to do. Now, Jupiter retrograde can also manifest through the educational path being more arduous or laborious, or switching educational path a lot, or having some delays in education or something like this, because Jupiter is about higher education, so especially everything that is college and beyond. Also, Jupiter retrograde can show having an unnecessary blindfold on them, metaphorically speaking, or like having more of a victim mentality, or being like uninspired, feeling lost. I feel like not so much of a victim mentality, but rather like this feeling of not knowing even when there are signs around them, because they have a tendency not to see the signs of the universe, or like to not necessarily believe them, or not necessarily be compelled by them, even if they do notice signs and synchronicities. Generally speaking, Jupiter retrograde can really be about the sense of direction, feeling lost, and not following or retaining knowledge as well. They don't take as many risks either, because Jupiter can be about taking risks and it's about faith. And finally, Jupiter, which is about language, and it can be about foreign relations, agreement, and diplomacy, because it's about how we communicate to the mind of other people. When Jupiter is retrograde, this can show a tendency to disagree a lot with others, a lot of times for small reasons or like for unconscious reasons. Like there can just be difficulty relating to the minds of others, or believing what other people say, or believing a teacher figure or like a guru or a guidance figure. These people a lot of times had to teach themselves throughout life, and they don't go the traditional path of following knowledge. They learn through their own questions and through their own experiences, rather than taking people's words at face value. When it comes to communicating to others, like I said, there could be like this unconscious tendency to disagree, even when you guys like actually may be agreeing, if that makes any sense. Like even if like technically you guys may be thinking the same things, you can let small words or like small choices of vocabulary cause like a disagreement or something like that, and it could be like an unconscious thing, because Jupiter is about word choice and it's about language. So anyway, with that being said, the positive of Jupiter, which is about abundance, is that since it's retrograde, it gets withheld inwardly, and so these individuals build a lot of internal stability or abundance wherever that they are at, but they have a tendency to stay more put, or to stay more comfortable, and like to travel less, and to be like less risk takers or adventurous, because Jupiter can be about risk and adventure. Generally speaking, Jupiter retrograde people have good self-control, but sometimes they can be stingy or fearful rather than giving and carefree when it comes to like resources. Jupiter retrograde can also be a indicator, or like a placement that indicates lack of a father figure in some way, or like lack of guidance, the fact that they needed to guide themselves throughout life. So next, we're going to talk about Saturn retrograde. This is another planet of the father. So when Saturn is retrograde, it can also show having lacked a father figure, especially somebody that set the tone and set the rules and played the role of structure and authority within your life. Especially when both Jupiter and Saturn are retrograde in a chart, this definitely shows an absence of the father figure in some form, whether that's mentally, physically, or in terms of emotional presence, you know. A lot of times people can be there but not be present for us in other ways. So having Saturn retrograde can show having the lack of structure, because Saturn is about discipline, structure, and responsibilities. So generally speaking, since retrogrades are about difficulty, when Saturn is retrograde, this almost always shows somebody that has difficulty around the topics of discipline and responsibility, and sometimes even ambition. They can also have a tendency to want to avoid commitment, and there can be difficulty with commitments and with authority as well. And generally speaking, when you have Saturn retrograde, you're somebody that may not want to be held accountable for things, or for people to depend on you, or to develop responsibilities, because there's a fear of those things becoming a cage. And unfortunately, this can sometimes cause a tendency to overlook certain professional opportunities, or to sabotage certain like success or potential, because Saturn retrograde shows maybe staying more content with your success. And unless these people push themselves, they may not reach the highest level of success that they can reach, which is usually pretty high, because Saturn has a stronger effect in their chart because it is technically closer to Earth at the time of their birth. Again, Saturn can show a tendency to want to avoid positions of authority or responsibility for fear of people being too dependent on you, or for fear of those things becoming like a cage. But also it can cause sabotage to your ultimate highest success if you like stay in that mindset a lot. Generally speaking, Saturn retrograde can show difficulty following structure, especially in relation to society, because retrogrades are about a disconnect between our expression of a planet and with the societal direction of things, because Earth continues to move past the planet, and meanwhile the planet appears to be held back in space. So it's about either things that hold us back or that we hold within ourselves. So sometimes there can be difficulty expressing your inner authority, or reluctance around doing so, especially because in upbringing you weren't taught how to do that, perhaps, and you didn't have an example perhaps of authority. There could just be difficulty following structure, especially the type of structure that would have came with having a fully present father figure who asserted an authoritative and structural role. So sometimes those that have Saturn retrograde, another thing is that they may let responsibilities get out of hand before they actually attend to them. Again, this doesn't show that these people can't handle responsibilities. It just shows like a more unconventional approach when it comes to responsibility. And it can also just show things like taking more work, and it's harder to get results. So responsibilities can get out of hand before they actually decide to attend to them. Oftentimes it shows somebody that needs to be scolded to do the right thing, or to like handle things. And Saturn retrograde can show you that you manifest a lot of those types of scenarios where life is metaphorically scolding you and causing you to have to like be disciplined or structured or something like that. That is Saturn retrograde. Next, we have Uranus retrograde. If you have Uranus retrograde, this can show unexpressed individuality, because in upbringing, perhaps you were not educated or taught to embrace your individuality. A lot of those things get withheld. Uranus is all about independence, rebellion, and self-reliance. So there can be a difficulty with standing up to authority when Uranus is retrograde, and also this tendency to want to do things a more traditional fashion. People with Uranus retrograde do not like change or disruption. They don't attempt to do things that are different than the norm, or that will be seen significantly different than the norm, or they just may have more difficulty doing that kind of stuff. But these people can be really intelligent. They can be geniuses, because again, Uranus is closer in its orbit to Earth at this time, meaning it has a stronger effect on them. And Uranus is a planet of geniuses and intelligence. They just may have never been taught to embrace that side of themselves, and instead it may come out inwardly, like it could just be an internal capability that they have. Now, Uranus retrograde can show an overly conventional approach to life, and somebody that avoids shakeups or changes, and can sometimes have this fear of loss or of cutting things off. Or they can also sometimes care too much about other people's opinions, or expectations to be able to shake things up or to cut things off. So also, Uranus is the planet that rules the 11th house, the house that comes after the 10th house. And 11th house is about freedom. When Uranus is retrograde, this can show restrictions to one's freedom. So you want to look at the sign that's in the 11th house. This shows where the restrictions are coming from, like what theme of life. So if you have Virgo, for example, in the 11th house, and you have Uranus retrograde in your chart somewhere, this shows that your work life can be a restriction to your freedom in some way, just because the ruler of the 11th is retrograde and it's connected to the sign of work and lifestyle. But generally speaking, though, those that have Uranus retrograde can experience less freedom because of a tendency to overwork themselves and to be in unfulfilling career paths that are not in alignment to their individuality, their personal interests, or to some sort of higher cause that they believe in. And this can often be due to the themes of Uranus retrograde, which can be the fear of turbulence, the fear of change, and sometimes a tendency to overthink and to not act on their ideas. Generally speaking, people with Uranus retrograde may choose the more secure of two paths, or like the more secure of two options. So that causes them to sometimes overwork themselves or be in like unfulfilling career paths that are financially rewarding or that provide them stability, but may not be in alignment to their individuality. And so also the next point is that Uranus is about technology and progress and innovation. Those with Uranus retrograde could have a disdain for technology, specifically when there are new updates to technology, like to the software of things, for example. These are the type of people that hate new updates because they usually like things the way that they were once they had gotten used to them. And these people are generally content with convention, and when they get used to things, they don't like for those things to be changed. And they have a sketchy relationship to technology, to gadgets, and to computers. They can have a lot of mishaps with those things, or they could just not like change or progress or innovation for some reason. So next, this leads us to Neptune retrograde. Neptune is about dreams, illusions, perceptions, and creativity. It's about our imagination, our subconscious. So when Neptune is retrograde, there could be a lot of things in the subconscious that don't get expressed due to vulnerability. And Neptune retrograde can show an avoidance of being vulnerable. And there could be unexpressed creativity with Neptune retrograde. In fact, people with Neptune retrograde can be highly creative individuals, but sometimes they may procrastinate on their dreams. But once they do act on their dreams, they have these very wild or vivid ideas. But there could just generally be this tendency to withhold their perceptions and to withhold their ideals, because Neptune is about ideals as well. And when it's retrograde, we hold those things back. And often this can be from a fear of loss or a fear of vulnerability with Neptune retrograde. Because when we're too idealistic, then we are vulnerable to being let down. So that's a theme that Neptune retrograde face within themselves, is the fear of being let down by their ideals and how to overcome that in order to reach their highest creative self. Generally speaking, people with Neptune retrograde, they just have a lot of perceptions and vulnerabilities that they leave unexpressed, and a lot of assumptions that also they have in their mind that they just don't express. So sometimes Neptune retrograde can cause errors in communication, or it can indicate challenges within one's communication style in some way. And generally speaking, they could be a little bit less optimistic about their fantasies or their ideals, obviously, as we were saying earlier. However, when they take action, these are very powerful manifestors, and they have this ability to wake people up to new ideas or to important points of views that people have never seen before, because all of this creative energy builds up within them. And these people can have wildly vivid or different perceptions than society, which can often be something that in their upbringing they were never taught how to embrace. They were never taught how to express their creativity. So these wild perceptions that are basically rogue or different and that are going in a different direction than the earth, metaphorically speaking, get held in within themselves for fear of vulnerability or ridicule or something. But oftentimes these are just very creative ideas, and especially when it's formed through art or just through some sort of artistic medium, it really opens up people's minds and inspires others, and it can be very revolutionary ideas. Finally, we have Pluto retrograde. Pluto is all about everything that is taboo, and it's regarding sexuality, and it's also regarding about the beneath the surface meaning of things or reality of things. The best way to describe Pluto is things that are beneath the surface, or things that like you have to read between the lines to understand. And it's all about the uncomfortable truth, and it's about like shadow work. It's all about negativity and how we transmute negativity, and how negativity pushes us through transformation. Generally speaking, with Pluto being retrograde, there can be an avoidance of transformation and a tendency to cling on to unideal situations for a little bit too long before finally letting go of things. And generally, though, there could just be this difficulty around expressing negativity or talking about uncomfortable truths or uncomfortable topics. And there just generally could also be unexpressed sexuality or taboo side. Like they may have difficulty expressing outwardly their dark or taboo side, or the side of them that is revolving desire, and that is revolving also their shadow side, or talking about dark topics or talking about the uncomfortable truth, even if it has to do with things that are regarding others. Instead of, expressing negativity, they would rather be nice or cordial or like polite. They may have too much of a neutral stance when it comes to conflict or disagreement, and they may procrastinate on confrontational situations or on expressing anger or negativity. It's similar to the effects of Mars retrograde, because Pluto and Mars both rule Scorpio, and that can be about deep-seated emotions, and it can be about conflict. But just like Neptune retrograde, these individuals are great manifestors, and that's because they have an understanding of what's happening at the core of things, or things that are the uncomfortable truth, or things that go deeper than the surface level meaning of reality, and they are able to transmute that into a desirable outcome. So that's what makes them good at manifesting things. Like they can take deep topics or like deep knowledge and apply it towards some sort of objective, and it's something that they do on an internal level, and they may express their deep feelings through creations such as art or through manifestations. They can be very ambitious individuals. So that's because Pluto is closer to Earth at the time of retrograde. So anyway, that is the meaning of each of the retrograde planets. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, then don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to this channel for more content. And with that being said, I appreciate you guys watching and supporting in any way that you do. And I'll talk to you guys sometime soon in another video. Peace.